I tell you the truth. Anyone who enters the sheepfold not by the gate, but by climbing in some other way, is a thief and a bandit. But the one who enters by way of the gate, now that is the shepherd of the sheep. In fact, the gatekeeper opens the gate for him. And the sheep, they hear his voice. In fact, he calls his sheep by name and then leads them out. Now, once he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because his is the voice they know. They don't follow a stranger. In fact, they run from him because that's not the voice that they know. Jesus used this figure of speech, and the people didn't understand what he was trying to tell them. So, Jesus then said to them, "What I'm telling you is the truth. I am the gate for the sheep. All those who came before me are bandits and thieves. The sheep didn't follow them. Yes, I am the gate. So all who enter through me will be saved. And then they'll be able to come in and to go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. But I came so that they may have life. And not just life, but abundant life." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Yeah. So I'm curious, I want you in just a second to turn to a partner and share with them anything that you noticed, or maybe a snippet of memory that perhaps bubbled to the surface as a result of experiencing that story. This does not have to be profound. It could be maybe a little piece from a sermon you heard preached on this passage, or a Bible study, or a formational class. It could just be something that kind of randomly that you noticed. For me, working on this story, what it reminded me of is, I've taken a lot of groups over to the Holy Land, and one of my tour guides years ago mentioned how, at night when the shepherd was ushering the shepherds into the cave, the shepherd would actually make an entranceway between the legs, and as each sheep came through, would kind of hold on and check the sheep, make sure that there weren't any broken bones, that there was no bleeding, that if there were things matted to its fur, it would take it off. And so each sheep would actually go through the gate of the physical body of the shepherd, and in so doing, the shepherd showed care for the sheep. So working on the story, that was what it reminded me of. But yours can be just something very simple. So 1 minute each. After the 1 minute, I'll do a little ding, all right? And then the other person share for 1 minute, I'll ding, and we'll move on. So turn to your partner. What came to mind with that story? Now, and maybe this already happened in what you just shared, but now, and this we're just going to popcorn it. We're just going to yell it out. Does this story remind you of any other biblical stories or biblical texts? So, and again, you don't have to explain it. Just, there's no rhyme or reason. Just if it reminded you of another biblical story, shout it out. Lost sheep. Okay, any others? Psalm 23, 23rd Psalm, sure. Lord is my shepherd. Yeah. Others? Say that again. Prodigal son, all right. Thank you. Others? The sheep and the goats. Yeah. Others? Sheep may safely graze. Thank you. Good shepherd. Moshe and the Red Sea. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so maybe let's just take 10 seconds for those of you, and you might not know all of those that were listed, but take a moment and think, how might I connect the story we just heard with one of those that was just now named? What are some of the connections there? Does thinking about that additional biblical story impact the story that you just heard? Does it give it a different meaning, a deeper meaning? Now what I'd like to do is ask you again to turn to your partner. You'll get 3 minutes each this time. Oh, I know. Is that too much? Or not nearly enough, maybe. Wait, you haven't heard what you're going to say. And I'd like you to share a personal story. Does this story, either as is, or as a result of what you shared with your partner already, or as a result of hearing some of these other potential parallel biblical stories, make you think of a personal story or personal experience that you may have had. So for me, and again, this doesn't have to be profound, right? So for me, the part of the story, and maybe you caught this when I told it, the part that just I find so precious is the calling by name. That the shepherd comes in, and there's a knowing, calling by name. And it reminds me of when I go into Starbucks. I go in there a lot. I pay for it on my phone, so I don't even have to have cash on me or even a credit card. And, so I go into the one in my neighborhood. It's kind of dangerous. It's within very easy walking distance of my house. And I order the same thing every time. And so I come in, and, and they know my name. And they know my order. It's kind of like Cheers, Norm, when he walks in. But there's a real comfort, that they know me so well that they automatically are putting my order through and taking care of me, taking care of that need for me. So that's a personal story that sort of bubbles up when I hear or think about this story. So again, it can be from any of the things we've done so far. And if you can't think of one, that's fine. But take 3 minutes each. Again, I'll ding when the 3 minutes are up, switch, and to 3 minutes, I'll ding again. Okay. Now, just a quick show of hands. Oh, please know how much it pains me to interrupt a story. I know it can do deep, as a storyteller myself, I know it can do deep psychological damage to not be allowed to finish your story. So I apologize for having to cut those short. Just a quick show of hands, how many, and it's totally fine if not, but I'm just curious, how many of you have even a minutely, and maybe even bigger, but even a minutely deeper understanding or maybe appreciation of the story that I told as a result of the sharing that just took place? Yeah, excellent. So what we just participated in here in these various very quick exercises is what I like to call oral exegesis and now communal exegesis. Now, exegesis is one of those big seminary words that sounds like it's about Jesus. And it can be about Jesus, but it's not necessarily about Jesus. Exegesis is just a fancy word for bringing out the meaning of the text. And so, when somebody's preparing a sermon or a Bible study, they hopefully will do some exegesis, checking resources to understand as much as they can about the text. But normally that's done in silence by reading other silent things. And that's not bad. That's not bad. It's just that you can add a dimension to that if you have oral exegesis. So, maybe there were things that came to mind or that you noticed. Maybe you're very familiar with this passage, but had never thought about something or hadn't realized something, or you had a new insight because of having seen it, right? You heard it and you saw it. So there's that sort of the oral exegesis, a deeper meaning that can come as a result of having had the story embodied by a teller and shared in that way. And then by sharing with each other, whether it was the whole group or with your partner, it's a communal exegesis. So each one of us initially can only we kind of have a finite number of things that we can sort of grasp about a particular story, just because of where we happen to be in our faith journey and the experiences that have brought us to that place at that moment. It's initially finite. It's not forever finite. It's just an initial, sort of finite, this is how the story resonates with me kind of thing. But by hearing even just one other person's insight or one other person's parallel biblical story or someone else's personal story that they relate to that story, ideally, that sort of adds an additional, each one that you hear adds an additional potential layer for you to further explore that story and thus have an ultimately deeper experience of that story yourself. So what we did also, oral exegesis and communal exegesis, but we also did a little experiment in parable, but it's using that word, or it's defining that word maybe in a little bit different way than what you're used to. Donald Davis, he's a wonderful storyteller, actually, served as a pastor for many years, and he came as the keynote speaker several years ago to the annual festival gathering of the Network of Biblical Storytellers. I think you all have a brochure in your packets about this upcoming event. It's an annual event. And I remember one of the things that he said in his keynote presentation was, most of us think parable is a short story with a moral. But really, if you get to the root of it, we don't have the time to go into all of the etymology. But basically, he said a parable, very simply, is any story that upon hearing it or experiencing it causes you to pull another story up from within you, set it down next to the first story, so that those two can shed light on each other. So here's what's interesting. He said, any story that does that for you is a parable for you, no matter what we call it officially. And any story that doesn't do that for you, and again, it's okay if it doesn't do that, but any story that doesn't do that for you at this time in your life, maybe later on or, previously it did, and that's okay, where you are now, it's just not speaking to you. But any story that doesn't kind of cause you to say, oh, that makes me think of, or, oh, that's like this story, right? If it doesn't cause you to pull another story out to set next to that first story, then for you, at this time in your life, that story is not a parable, no matter what we officially call it, right? Now, why I tend to really appreciate this definition of parable. I use it to help me prepare sermons, actually, to link stories together as so the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, shall we say. But this kind of connection and deepening is important as well, especially making those personal connections with the story. Because what it does is it makes the Bible relevant. Now, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here. I'm assuming that all of you, or most of you, already know that the Bible is relevant. But sadly, there's a whole society out there, even people sitting in our pews, who come dutifully, and yet, the Bible has been presented in a way that is, sadly, so kind of boring and dull that it's kind of like, well, yeah, whatever, that's what does that have to do with me? And so making these kinds of connections that deepen the experience and then ultimately can connect with a personal experience, that makes the Bible relevant, because these are relevant stories. Yes, they happened to people a long time ago, in a land far, far away, but they're still absolutely relevant to our lives today. And as people of faith, we know that, right? But it's hard sometimes to convince others of that. So we've got another reason that's important is, we've got this theme in the diocese, a 3-year theme of knowing your story and living it boldly. But you can't live it boldly unless you know it first, right? And therein lies the rub, because for many people, we have I remember Phyllis Tickle, may she rest in peace, saying that we were in the United States maybe a generation and a half away from the majority of people knowing the stories. And so if we're going to tell our story boldly, you have to know the story first. So I want to share with you, now this is a musical example of what we're talking about, but what can happen, why, again, another additional reason why it's so important to know the stories, to have them residing deeply within you. So this is an example from one of the founders of Sweet Honey in the Rock, Bernice Johnson Reagan. And just listen to the parallels between what she's saying to at that time, newly installed first ever African-American president of the United States.
In 1962, in my hometown, we were engaged in a very intense struggle against racial segregation. And there were mass jailings. At one point, a federal judge issued an injunction with names on it of the people they thought were the leaders of the movement. Reverend Samuel Wells was in Shiloh Baptist Church that night, and he said, "I'm not going to let no injunction turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round."
Now listen carefully.
I know this is a show, but you have to actually sing this song. You can never tell when you might need it. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. Ain't gonna let no injunction turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no injunction turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. Ain't
One more.
gonna let no jailhouse turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no jailhouse turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, yeah, keep on talking, yeah, marching up the freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, yeah, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land.
Yeah, amen. Now I share that with you. Yeah. Now I share that with you as just a musical version of story, right? I mean, it's still story. It's knowing your story, and not just to tell it, but to have as a reserve, to pull from whenever you might need it, because you don't know when you're going to need it. She was looking at this, this young man, and I mean, the job of the president is not easy ever, but for the first African American, she knew that he had, there were times coming where he was going to need to pull from those reserves. Well, we don't have to be president of the United States to know that, all of us face trials, right? What do we have? What's in our reserves? What do we have to pull from? And as people of faith, for centuries, for millennia, it was the stories. We don't have those stories, many of us, these days. And I think that we're seeing the results of that. Amen? Yeah, in our society. So just a couple of quick, and this is in your packet on page 19. There's these three are listed, so you don't need to worry about writing these down. They're already on page 19. I wanted to just take you very quickly through. These are three resources, online resources that, and organizations actually, that I have found to be very helpful. So the first one is the Network of Biblical Storytellers. That's NBS. INT is international. And I'm going to go to that website here, and mainly to show you that on that website, see right here, there's always a box with a video, a featured video. But underneath that, see where it says more videos? So if you click on that, it'll take you to the YouTube page for the Network of Biblical Storytellers. And you see this little arrow, or the little, right here? So if you click on that a couple of times, then you'll see the view all. And once you get that, then if you scroll down, there are several examples of load more. So, there are a lot of videos, right? Load more, yeah, lots of different people telling stories. If you need an online resource of biblical stories, that would be one place that you could go to, whether it's for your own edification, whether it's for teaching, preaching, there's that available for you. Go back here. Then gotell.org is the website. I wonder why that is. Let's try that again. Well, okay, I'll just tell you about it. It came up yesterday. GoTell is the sort of the retirement project of Tom Boomershine. He's the man who founded the Network of Biblical Storytellers. He wrote Story Journey, which is one of the books that's listed on that page 19 resource page that I highly recommend. It's a great curriculum for Sunday school, even for preaching if you don't follow the lectionary, which of course you all do. but certainly for a Bible study, it would be a great curriculum for that as well. What Tom has done, he's a retired New Testament professor. And what he has done is he's taken every gospel text from the 3-year lectionary cycle, so every single gospel text in all 3 years of the lectionary cycle, and he has recorded somebody telling it. Now, unfortunately, there's no video, but there is audio for that, so you can at least get the voice inflection and that sort of thing. He has written a commentary from a performance standpoint, so if you're going to, if not learn the story yourself and tell it, at least read it in a way that is a little more performative, shall we say. And so you can read that, and also then there's an audio of him basically reading his written commentary for that. So if you're interested in again, that additional layer of the story that you might not get just from reading in silence, that might be a website. If nothing else, just as something to check, whether you use it or not, it might be a place to check when you're working on a sermon or a lesson plan or a Bible study. And then the last one here is Faith and Wonder. Let's hope this one comes up. And this is one of my former students. I wear a lot of different hats vocationally, and one of those is I'm the Dean of the Academy for Biblical Storytelling. It's a 1-year certification program, runs the calendar year. It's a school without walls. We do meet face-to-face twice, but much of it is done online. And we offer a basic level certification and then an optional master level certification. And so Casey Fitzgerald is a Presbyterian pastor in Alexandria, Virginia. She did the double whammy. She did the basic and the master certification. And the big project, if you do the master level certification year, is to come up with an educational resource. And so her resource, and I love it, if it's exactly what you were saying at the beginning, Bishop, about how you believe, and she does too, and I think you're both onto something, that the formation really should start at the home. And so she knows that most parents don't know these stories. So, how do you do that in the home when the parents are bereft of the stories themselves? So faithandwonder.com or .org. .com is an online resource specifically for families, and the way that she envisioned it was maybe 15 minutes around the dinner table, and so she has different programs, and she only did the one kind of short piece for her requirement for the academy, and then it was so successful that she has added to it. So I wanted to just show you. She made up a sort of a summary of what Faith and Wonder is about, and I want to show that to you now.
Anytime? Yeah. Okay. Listen.
Say it, no, whisper it.
Listen.
Perfect. All right. Awesome.
Following behind, they began to shout out, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Hosanna in the highest! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord."
Prophesy then, prophesy to the bones. Say to them, "O you dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God to these dry bones, I will put my spirit in you, and you will live."
On the day of Pentecost, they were all gathered together in one place. When suddenly, from heaven came the sound like rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them, and
Now, is there anyone among you who, if your child asks for a fish, will give a snake instead of a fish?
Sir, give me this water.
Just barely down here. Not right now, but every time you see a person, yes.
Welcome to Story on Fire, Day 8. Today we are going to more officially map out where it is that this story takes place.
Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written here, so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you will have life in his name.
The story of God. For the people of God.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So some things to keep in mind, and why I am a personal believer in the power of storytelling, is this is an old, if you're an educator, formational person, this is probably nothing new to you, but the experts, whoever they were, at some point, did research, and they said that, and this is long ago, this is before our current digital age, so I think that this is even more so now, probably, but that people tend to only remember about 10% of what they hear. Now think about that for a second. When you think of kind of traditional sermons or Sunday school lessons, the traditional way, has been, to sit passively, listen, maybe read along, right? But largely it's just a hearing. And some people are above the curve here, but the average is that you're probably only going to remember if the only sense that was involved was hearing, is 10%. Now, as people interested in formation, are you okay with that? Hopefully not. Hopefully not. If you add a visual, that doubles it. Wow, doubles it. That's amazing. But it's still just 20%. If we're about lifelong formation, how much formation do you think can be done if we're really only retaining about 20%? I mean, hopefully you're not okay with that. But you add some kind of an experience to it. You get the people involved in some way, which, if you look at an hour worship service, for instance, that does happen. When you come forward for the Eucharist, if you're crossing yourself, if you're singing, there are genuflecting, there are a lot of ways to get your body physically involved. And in an hour's time, it's more than just listening. But I think this is an important thing to keep in mind for any time you're doing any kind of a presentation, specifically where formation is the key. Another way of looking at this is what the Chinese have put into a proverb. If you tell me, I'm probably going to forget. If you show me, I'll remember, but if you involve me, I'll understand. And here, I like to do this little experiment, because you think like, well, gosh, we want them to remember. Like, shouldn't that be enough, right? If you show me, I remember. Let's just a little experiment here. On the count of 3, and not before, on the count of 3, if you know it, and I'm guessing most of you, you might surprise yourself, I bet you do know it. On the count of 3, I want you to shout out the formula that Albert Einstein was famous for. 1, 2, 3. E equals mc squared. You all remembered it. Good for you. How many of you know what it means? And by know, I don't mean, well, E equals energy and M equals mass. No, I mean, how many of you understand that formula in a way that you could explain it to somebody else who has no idea what it means? I'm guessing a few of you probably do, but way less than the number of you that just shouted out E equals mc squared. So it's not enough just to remember something, right? Especially if formation is the key. If formation is the key, they have to understand it. They have to know how to apply it to their life, which takes us back to the relatability of the scriptures and the relevance of the scriptures. Because if all you're doing is talking, if you're not engaging, then this is what might happen. Now, if people aren't doing that literally, there are ways to do that aren't, right? If they're checking out, that's just another version of this, right? And if that's happening on some level, then formation, at least the kind of formation you want, is probably not taking place, right? Okay. So what we need to remember, this is a definition of story and storytelling by Adam Bartholomew. He's the co-founder, along with Tom Boomershine, of the Network of Biblical Storytellers. I use a lot of different definitions of storytelling. They're all good. This one, in fact, I often will run through this definition in my head before I perform. as a way to remind myself, now what's my goal here? What am I trying to do? So an oral story, and oral is the key word here to differentiate it from reading in silence, right? That's another kind of story, but that's not the kind of story we're talking about. So an oral story has the, you can hear it, element to it. So an oral story is an event that is created, or in the case of the biblical stories, we're recreating those stories, through our voice and body. That's the toolbox that the storyteller has. And by storyteller, it can be rector, priest, teacher, right? So it doesn't have to be a full-blown, bona fide, performer here. We'll talk a little bit more about performance in just a second. But anybody who is delivering the Word of God, right? That's what we're talking about with storyteller here. You've got your voice and your body, right? And what you're trying to do with your voice and body is recreate that event in such a way that the audience, and here's our big money word for the day. Experience. Thank you. Let's try that again. Yes, experience the event, right? You don't want them to not get it all because, right? Because all it's been is mwah, 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 right? That's not, that's an experience, but again, that's not the formational experience you're looking for. So experience is the key, because experience, that word conveys something beyond just what I hear or even just what I see. That resides more deeply here, and we'll do more of that in just a second. So if you will indulge me for just a few minutes, I want to take you through a very quick communications theory course. I think that, as far as I'm concerned, what I'm getting ready to share with you is worth the price of admission. This is important not just for telling stories, not just for preaching, not just for teaching. This is important just for having conversations. Which is storytelling in a very informal way. You started us off talking about how essential sharing the story is, and so this stuff is essential for doing that essential activity in the most impactful way possible. So if you think about all the different ways that you can communicate, basically you come up with this grid. You've got 4 different quadrants. So in the upper left-hand quadrant, or the column, you've got verbal communication and nonverbal. Our rows are non-vocal and vocal. Now, don't be confused by verbal and vocal. Verbal just means there is verbiage, meaning words, right? So you could say like words and non-words. Sometimes you hear the words, sometimes you don't. That's the vocal, non-vocal part, okay? So in that upper left-hand quadrant, where the intersection of verbal and non-vocal come together, don't give me examples, give me the category of communication that uses words that you don't hear. Yeah, reading. So written word, right? So, and that can be with, not just books and magazines and newspapers, but screens and tweets and emails and bulletin boards and T-shirts. There's the, following Jesus and chill, right? Bumper stickers, so anything that is written down, whether digitally or not, right, would be communication. There's a whole lot. Post-Gutenberg, that quadrant exploded, right, as did literacy. So a whole lot of communication happens in that upper left-hand quadrant. Let's go down now. So what would be the category of communication that uses words that you do hear? Yeah. So the spoken word, right? Or singing. I'll put singing in there as well. So whether you're singing, whether you're just conversing, whether you're preaching, whether you're teaching, whether you're performing, all of those would fall into that lower left-hand column. Now moving over to the right-hand column, upper right, what is the category of communication that does not use words, you don't hear anything, and yet something's being communicated? Body language, there it is. So examples of that, can be facial expressions, hand gestures, posture, movement, placement, all the things that you witnessed me doing this morning, that you saw me doing this morning, right? You heard me as well, but I was also communicating when I wasn't speaking. In fact, some of you maybe have been, I'm going to say on the receiving end, surely you haven't been on the delivery end, of body language, say on the highway, maybe when, yeah, all right. So you know how that works, how body language works, right? Lower right. What is the category, and this is a little more obscure, I think, for most people, where words are not doing the communicating, and yet you do hear something? So those are some examples. The technical term is para language, P-A-R-A language, but since most of us aren't linguists here, we're going to go in quotes with tone of voice, right? Now here's what's interesting. Tone of voice has to be, and screams and grunts, that is true as well, but a lot of the tone of voice is actually hung on words, and yet this is a non-word column. That's because it's not the words that are doing the communicating. It's how you're saying the words that's doing the communicating. And that weighs way, way, way heavier than the words. So for instance, let's just do a little experiment here. If, God forbid, you were ever on the receiving end of this, you tell me what you received. I said I love you! Now, left-hand column, what did the words say? I said I love you. Doesn't that just warm the cockles of your heart? Were your cockles warmed? What did you receive? I'm getting on my nerves, right? Yeah. Yeah, anger, frustration, anything but love, kind of, right? And here's the thing. So even though I said the right things, that didn't matter. The words didn't matter. It was how I said it that made the difference. And that's key because experts tell us, and of course this number is, even the range is fluid, but even the most conservative say that at least 65% of what gets received comes from that right-hand column. And some say almost all, 95% of what gets received comes from the right-hand column. Even 65% is a decent chunk over half, right? So the majority of what tends to get received for most people comes from that right-hand column. Now let's talk about these columns for a second. Both columns have their strengths, which means both columns have their weaknesses. What do you think the left-hand column is better at communicating? Facts, figures, concepts, ideas, and there are times where we need to communicate those things. So yay for the left-hand column. What do you think the right-hand column is better at communicating? Yeah, emotions, attitude, tone, perhaps intent, right? And there are times where we need to express our emotions. We need to express those things. So yay for the right-hand column. The left-hand column is almost always consciously chosen. I mean, every once in a while a word might slip in, but by and large, we consciously choose the words that we're going to speak, the words we're going to preach. If we're doing a lecture, we take time to make sure we have all the words right. And it's not that the words aren't important, it's just that, well, I'll get to that in a second. So, left-hand column, almost always consciously chosen. The right-hand column is almost never consciously chosen, unless you're an actor and you've, or a storyteller or something, and you've been trained to be more intentional about that. But in everyday conversation, in preaching, teaching, right? Not only do we not consciously choose the right-hand column, we often aren't even aware of what we're communicating as far as the right-hand column is concerned. I was doing a retreat a couple months ago, and we took a break. And during the break, I was up at my computer, and I was I was fiddling with it, and I had old contacts in that were not where I could hardly see. So I'm kind of squinting, and I'm sort of doing this. And somebody came up and they said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just trying to find something on my computer." They said, "Oh gosh, well, like the expression on your face, I thought that you were in pain, or I thought you were mad, or something was wrong." Like, no, I just couldn't see. right? So not only did I not consciously say, okay, now I'm going to furrow my eyebrows, and now I'm going to scowl, and now I didn't even know I was doing it. And yet that's what got received, right? So think about this. The majority of what gets received comes from the right-hand column, and yet we're not even aware, let alone consciously choosing, often what we are communicating via the body language and the tone of voice. That's significant, folks. That's significant as communicators, as people of formation who have to do some sort of communication to do that formation, right? The other thing I want to say is that the left-hand column takes longer to process than the right-hand column. The right-hand column is processed immediately. Even if the words are very simple, it still takes us time to process those words because words are kind of an artificial, it was our way, humans' way of trying to communicate. But so in English, we put together certain sounds to make words that we know mean these certain things, but we've got some Spanish speakers here who have a completely different set of sounds that come together that mean something completely different. And there are however many languages in the world where each individual culture has said, no, these sounds together mean this. So in English or Spanish or whatever language, we're having to decipher what those sounds mean as those words, and then what those words mean in that context, and what all of those sentences in that context together mean. Now, this is often nanoseconds, but there's still a slight lag. And it's also more work for the listeners, which is why if you've ever taken a public speaking course, they tell you to pause every once in a while and not to talk too fast. Otherwise, you're gonna leave your audience in the dust, right? Because you've got to give them time to process all that and catch up. But it's also why, if the main communication is only hearing, so we can't even see what the words are, then they have to work even extra hard to understand, to process what all of those words mean. And it's why, if they don't see it, it's harder for them to remember. Not impossible, but it's more work and thus harder for them to recall it later because it's all up here and it's all that processing. Now again, the left brain is amazing. The brain itself, and especially the left brain, is amazing. It's just more work. The right-hand column is processed immediately, right? Which is why when I said I love you, what you processed was anything but love. And it's why most times, if you were on the receiving end of that, you wouldn't take the time to then say, yeah, but the words were I love you. It's like, as far as you're concerned, I've received your message loud and clear, right? We can move on, right? Because that was processed first. So when the left side is not in agreement with the right side, like that example, you're going to believe the right side because you've processed it first. Make sense? Yeah. So here's the thing. Not only is the majority of what gets received, does it tend to come from that right side, but they say, and this isn't going to add up exactly, because these are from two different studies, so it's close, but the majority of what gets received on the nonverbal side is actually what they see. What they hear is important, but almost twice as much, well, almost, of what gets received is the body language, is what they see. And like I said, in this digital generation culture where so much is a visual, right? I think that's only going to grow. That's only going to that percentage is only going to get bigger. So you got to give them something to look at, right? You got to, that's what if you want what you're giving them to really sink in, this is really important stuff. So my question for you, just very quickly. And by this, how might this, I mean this theory, this understanding that the majority of what gets received comes from the right-hand column. And by traditional, I mean post-Gutenberg, last couple hundred years, anyway. How might this pose a problem for the way we have traditionally, last couple hundred years, done Bible study, tried to interpret and understand the Bible, and how we've taught the Bible? Turn to a partner and just take a minute to brainstorm or think about that a little bit. If we could have the slide now. Thanks. So to close up, just the importance of the word experience. The reason that an experience is important and why I tend to think a storytelling experience is so impactful and powerful is that rather than hitting us in the head and only part of the head, generally the left brain, what a story does is it hits us in the heart and the gut first, which is why I love this picture. You can find just about anything on the internet, right? So we've got the heart around the gut here, right, in this picture. It's a visceral experience, right? So a story, because of that right-hand column, it hits us in the heart where our emotions are, and in our gut where our experience, our lived experience is. And it tends to be a visceral experience. We're not just sort of passively hearing it. We're not thinking about it as much. We're kind of reliving the experience. If you're communicating emotions, then people are immediately connecting with times in their lives when they have experienced those same emotions. Or it's connecting with a lived experience. I love this great Greek word. Any Greek scholars in the room? Yeah. I never say it quite right, but splagnozoimai, right? Which is now this doesn't mean that you're having a bowel movement, all right? But this is where it resides, right? So if you go back to the story I told at the beginning, and how many times it was talked about, the sheep, they know the shepherd. It's his voice that they know, not the stranger's voice. It's the shepherd's voice that they know. It's not a knowing up here, right? It's a knowing down here, right? And ideally, that's where the stories need to reside. I had some handouts in your pamphlet there. So those are for your edification. The mulling is a way to internalize the story, and then 2 interesting takes on the word perform and entertain that might help you to reclaim those words as things that the church should maybe be thinking about using. But I'd like to end with one last video that shows. You remember that Faith and Wonder blog that we watched. One of the things that she did once it really exploded online, and with it being online, it's a global community. So a couple of years, maybe 2 years ago, whenever the last time Mark was in the lectionary cycle, she put it out there for people to learn the Easter story, the resurrection story from Mark, and to videotape themselves telling it and to send it to her. She edited it together, and you've got this beautiful all-age, ethnicities telling the story. So in the season of Easter, I leave you with this powerful story.
This is the story of God for the people of God.
Okay, quiet on the set.
When the Sabbath was over,
Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices,
so that they might go and anoint him.
And very early, on the first day of the week,
when the sun had risen,
they went to the tomb.
They had been saying to one another,
"Who will roll away the stone from us, from the entrance to the tomb?"
When they looked up, they saw that the stone,
which was very large,
it was huge! Seriously, it was huge! Had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb,
they saw a young man
dressed in a white robe,
sitting on the right side.
And they were alarmed. But he said to them,
"Do not be alarmed.
You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified.
He has been raised.
He's not here.
Look, there's the place they laid him.
But go.
Go!
Go and
tell his disciples and Peter
that he is going ahead of you to Galilee.
There you will see him.
Just as he told you.
Just as he told you! So they went out and fled from the tomb.
For terror and amazement had seized them.
And they said nothing to anyone. Because they were afraid. Now go!
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 Go and tell.
He is risen.
He is risen.
He is risen indeed.
He is risen!
He is risen!
He is risen! He is risen indeed. God.
He is risen indeed.
He is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Indeed.
He is risen indeed.
He is risen indeed.
He is risen. He is risen indeed. He is risen indeed.
Go and tell the story.